Lives of the Presidents, told in words of one syllable, by Jean S. Remy. Chapter 4. James Madison. In the home of his grandfather at Port Conway, Virginia, was born, in the spring of 1751, the small boy who was to be our fourth president. He was very young, though, when he went to live at Montpelier, his father's great farm in Virginia, and here he led much the same life as George Washington did when a boy. He was but a small boy when the French and English war began, and when Braddock lost the day, a great fear of the Indians spread to the very door of his home, and he grew up with the name of George Washington ever in his ears as a great hero. His school days were much like those of Jefferson. He was a young boy when he could read French and Spanish with ease, and was as well hard at work at Greek and Latin. In 1769 he went to Princeton College, and here, as well as when he was at home, Jefferson was a great help to him. The older man wrote to the boy in the quiet old college town about the scenes of war. He told him much of the British troops in the Boston streets, of young John Adams, and of Washington. So, when in 1771 he left college, he knew a great deal about the strife of the day, and had deep, clear thoughts about it. At home he led a quiet life with his books, until 1774. Then he was put at the head of a few men, who were to guard their own town if the British troops came there. In this post he showed such a wise, clear mind, and did his part so well, that in a short time he was put in a high place in his state, and from there in 1779 was sent to Congress. Jefferson was at this time governor of Virginia, and the two men were close, warm friends. For 25 years Madison was one of the first men in this land. He had no taste for war, but he soon took a high place with those who made the laws of the land. One of the great things he did was to help draw up the Constitution of the United States. In 1794 this grave and quiet man married, as Washington and Jefferson had done, a young and lovely widow. She was but 22 years old, 20 years younger than he, and her name was Mrs. Dorothy Payne Todd. Later on, the folks who grew to love this fair lady so well gave her the name by which we know her today, Dolly Madison. She was a Quakeress, and so fair and sweet was she, in her quiet little gown of gray, that once a friend said to her, "Dolly, truly thou must hide thy face, so many stare at thee." For 1 year after his marriage, Madison lived at Montpelier. Then again he went into public life, first in his state, and after that, in 1800, as Secretary of State under Jefferson. Now began the gay life at the White House, for which Dolly Madison won so much fame. Jefferson's wife was dead, and it was the wife of his friend that helped him entertain the White House guests. Well did this lovely lady do her part in 1808, when, as the wife of the President, she became the real mistress of the White House. More than ever did the people love her. Today, of all the pictures of the President's wives that hang up on the White House walls, none is more lovely than that of the gay and pretty Dolly Madison. Madison was most of all a man of peace, and yet it was while he was in office that the United States was drawn into the War of 1812. England, then at war with France, said she had the right to search American ships to see if they were taking aid to France. America would not give this right to England, and so the war began. In 1814 the British came to the city of Washington, and for the only time in American history the President had to leave his home. Madison, with the Secretary of State and some friends, went to a little inn near Washington, and here they were met by Mrs. Madison, who had stayed as long as she could at the White House to save some things from the hands of the British. She had brought the great Declaration of Independence, and had cut from its big frame the picture of Washington and brought it safely away. The British troops set fire to the White House, the Navy Yard, the Capitol, and in fact the whole town. They left in great haste, though, when they heard that our troops were on the way, and the next day Mrs. Madison put on the dress of a washwoman, so folks would not know her, and made a start for her home. But the British had set fire to a bridge she had to cross on the way, and then she begged an American soldier to row her over the river. He would not do so until she told him who she was, and then he was very glad to take this brave little lady in his boat. Only black ashes marked the spot on which the White House had once stood, so she had to go to her sister's home, where the President soon joined her. The English troops now tried to take Baltimore, but our brave men drove them back, and when they tried to make a raid on New Orleans, General Jackson and his troops fought so hard that the foe could not get into the city. This was the last fight of this war, and peace was signed at Ghent, December 24th, 1814. From that day, England has had to leave our ships alone, and to treat America as one of the great nations of the world. In 1817, Madison was not sorry to go back to his old home, and here many happy years were spent, for the fair lady of the White House kept open house in her own home, and guests from far and near were glad to come here. One of Madison's dearest friends was old Thomas Jefferson, who often rode over from his home at Monticello, which was only 30 miles from Montpelier. Madison wrote a good deal at this time, and once again was seen in public life. In 1829 he was at the head of the great change made in all the laws of the whole land. He died after a long sickness at his home in Montpelier on June 28th, 1836. End of Chapter 4. Recording by Greg Giordano. Newport Richey, Florida.